Hello again to all microbiology enthusiasts. This is again Dr. M with another video covering the interesting field of microbiology. I have gone over different types of reservoirs for infections. I have gone over different ways microbes can be transmitted to us, the human host. In this set of slides, video 8, I am going to cover infections. I want to give you a definition of what an infection is and the different ways that we can look at infections. So, an infection is defined as an invasion of a host by a microbe. We have seen where a microbe naturally lives in either an animal, in the soil, someplace outside of our body. When that microbe is transmitted from its natural residence, its natural reservoir into our body, this is what we define by invading us. So it's an infection. Now, not all infections result in disease, and we'll look later on into the conditions that result in disease. Just the mere entry into our body is an infection, but we have our own way of fighting back called our immunity. But I'll go into that in later videos. So right now, when that invading microbe enters our body, invades our body, we label it as a pathogen, an infectious agent. Okay, with that, I'm going to move down to slide number 2. And this is slide number 2 gives you an example of a microbial infection. In this case, you're looking at someone's hand, and this person has a fungus that invaded the skin and caused damage to that hand tissue, as you can see. So we call this a fungal infection because the invading microbe was a fungus. So it is a fungal infectious disease of the hand. So we can classify infections in different ways. We can classify an infection based on the type of microbe that is causing the infection. We can classify an infection based on how prevalent that infection occurs, or we can classify an infection depending on how the infection spreads. That takes us into slide number 4 and gives you an example. When we classify an infection by the cause or by the type of a microbe that is causing it, these are examples of that. It can be a viral infection, and of course, COVID is a perfect example of that. COVID is a virus, and the infection it causes is a viral infection. This would be the same thing if you had HIV. If a person who was infected with HIV, to be another viral infection. HCV is another viral infection. On the other hand, if you ate some food and it had some salmonella growing in it, you end up with a salmonella infection. Salmonella is a bacteria, so it would be a bacterial infection. Again, on this slide, you see another example of a fungal infection. You see the nail there that has a fungal infection. So it's a nail fungus. Fungus love the nail bed because the nail can trap moisture, and fungi love moist environments. So you can see a lot of fungal infections of the nail. So we call it a nail fungal infection. And then the bottom slide picture there shows you a parasitic infection. In this case, someone has a worm in their foot. It's kind of an ugly looking picture, but it is a parasitic infection because the invading microbe is a parasite. And move on to slide number 5. In this case, another way that we can classify different types of infection is by how prevalent they occur. For example, if it is occurring all over the globe, and again, COVID is a perfect example, you can practically find COVID infection in any of the 5 continents. So it is pandemic. It's occurring everywhere in the world, globally. On the other hand, we can classify an infection as being an epidemic if it occurs suddenly in a specific geographic area, and then all of a sudden you have a large increase in cases of a particular infection. And I give the example there of a measles outbreak. For example, a few years ago, in some part of the United States, the CDC noticed that there was a sudden rise in number of cases of measles. So it was a measles epidemic outbreak. Another term that we can classify an infection is it's an endemic infection. In this case, the infection occurs at low frequency in a specific geographic region. And again, a perfect example is in several regions in the tropics. You find cases of malaria just occurring on a regular basis at low levels. It's basically indigenous to those areas, and we call that endemic. Whereas on the other hand, if it's a sporadic infection, it just occasionally occurs at, irregular intervals. It could be sporadic, it just occurs, almost randomly. Then we move on to slide 6. In this case, the way we classify infections can be by the method that it was spread. Was it an infection that was spread by direct contact? And there's a perfect example. Someone's has a pet, and that pet is loving them, licking them all over. Now, most cases, people who have pets have had those pets vaccinated or had their shot. But if, for example, that pet accidentally had some kind of a microbe growing in them, they could pass it on to that person in the process of licking them. That would be direct contact. An infection can be caused by being spread through a vector. And there's an example of a vector is that fly. And another example of a vector could be a mosquito or a tick. Any of those are vectors, meaning they're carriers, carry the microbe in them, and then they pass it on to you, the human host, either by landing on that sandwich or on your hand, or for mosquitoes, they carry the malaria parasite into the blood when they bite you, and they have the parasite eggs, the malaria parasite eggs. Okay, slide number 7. Another way that infections can be spread, that it can be classified is by method of spread. And again, those are examples. One example is through contaminated water. That little boy is drinking water that is contaminated, and any microbe in that water can be passed on to the human through the contaminated water. And that is the microbe in the water causes an infection in the human when it enters the human digestive system. Another very common example is there's a case there, an example of this person is cutting up the chicken. The chicken could possibly have some microbe in it. Perfect example again is salmonella. It could be another microbe. And if the chicken is not cooked well, that microbe could definitely enter the people who eat the chicken. Or if the cutting board was not washed well, and any microbes that remained on that cutting board were passed on to the chicken during the process of cutting and preparing it, then eventually definitely the microbe on the cutting board or in the chicken could be passed on to the human, and of course, once it enters the human host, they have an infection, and it's up to the person's immune system if it is strong enough to fight back and avoid disease, or the organism could be allowed to multiply and cause disease if the immune system is not strong enough. Another common example there, you see a field of vegetables growing. It could be broccoli, it could be lettuce, it could be spinach. And in these large farms, if the irrigation water that is watering those vegetables gets contaminated, for example, by sewage, then of course the vegetables could pick up, any microbe in the sewage, in their leaves, and of course when you eat the lettuce or the spinach, you end up getting the microbe entering your body, infecting your body. And again, the same thing, will depend on how strong your immune system is. Can it fight back and kill the microbe that have invaded, or will they take over and cause disease? And that is why many times you hear recalls being advertised in the news. All of those who bought lettuce from Walmart on such and such a date, please don't eat it because they found contamination on it. They found a certain microbe growing in it, and they're advising the public to please do not eat that lettuce. So the take-home message from this set of video slides is again, just like we must understand where organisms naturally live, their reservoirs, to be aware of those sources. We must understand how organisms or microbes are transmitted to us, the human host. And of course, we must also understand how we can potentially get infected and know how to avoid. So if you know that certain organisms can get infected by contact, like your pet, or like some direct action or activity that puts you in contact with where the organism lives, then you avoid that. And of course, by vectors, by reducing exposure to those vectors, which is the reason why they always say, if you have standing water, please make sure you get rid of it, or make sure that you spray it with DEET to reduce the presence of vectors that could pick up microbes in that stagnant water, like West Nile virus in stagnant water. And if it's an inanimate type of vehicle, again, at least you have to understand that form of infection and minimize any risk. And that is the end of this set of videos. If you have any comments or questions, or any issue that you want to express with regard to these videos, please leave me a comment, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions or to address them.